Okay, well, here I am. This talk, The Silent Impact of Mineral Loss and Cognitive, Emotional and Mental Health, very much relates to what I have to offer you, I hope, as a result of my life experience. And that life experience to date has been quite interesting. I started off as part of the British Olympic team going to Mexico City that number of years ago. And unfortunately, I damaged my back. And so that was the end of my athletic aspirations, but certainly not my interest in the human body. I then went on and became a geologist. And during 10 years, I took a master's degree in mineral exploration. I worked in Africa. I explored for copper and cobalt and lead and zinc and chromium and gold. And then I became a fellow of the Geological Society, a chartered geologist, and then I had a certain early life crisis. And I retrained as a chiropractor in America. And I came back to England and set up a practice some 40 years ago. And I slept, ate, drank, dreamed about PACs for the first 3 years. And I thought that all the problems in the world related to subluxations. And then I realized that, hey, there's a biochemistry going on here. And diet and nutrition play a big role. And lo and behold, I found out that those minerals, which I've been exploring for and mining, actually played an intrinsic role in our general health and well-being. And so I got involved with a company based in Hungary called Bearish Drops, and they promoted a trace mineral compound there. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. And unfortunately, the Medicines Control Agency in the UK decided it wasn't a supplement, but it was a medical pharmaceutical grade product. That product now is actually used in Hungary as a roborant. It helps with radiotherapy, chemotherapy considerations. But one of the mantras at that time was that the foods we eat today are not as nutritious as they were in the past. And I came across a book that is published by the Medicines Control Agency in the UK called The Composition of Foods. And I noticed that that was the 5th edition. So I took myself off to the British Library and I compared and contrasted the food analysis in the mineral context between 1940 and 1991. And these are the results. And you can see this is a mean consideration over 72 different foods, and at the end is a weighted average. Now you can see that the only trace element that they actually analyzed for in 1920s, 1930s is copper. And the reason for that is that it only became an essential trace element at the end of the 1920s. And how they created that was through rats, and they deprived the rat of copper in its diet. And they found out that, hey, it became anemic. Not only did it become anemic, but there was a growth issue. Not only was there a growth issue, but there was also issues with connective tissue and, of course, fatigue. And this gradually gave an understanding that copper had an essential role in our general health and well-being. Now, subsequent to copper, of course, we have zinc, we have selenium, we have molybdenum, we have a variety of other different trace and ultra-trace elements. But one of the things that is very difficult when you're looking at these types of figures, well, what do they really mean? Now, in order to understand that, for instance, with copper, the recommended daily allowance or nutrient value is 1.3 milligrams. So think of a teaspoon as containing 5 milligrams. So calcium's easy. We're dealing with 1/5 of a teaspoon. Magnesium is 1/12. For copper, it's 1/4,500 of a teaspoon. So these trace and ultra-trace elements are minuscule copper, chromium, which is recognized an essential trace element in the US, not in Europe. But in order to actually have 0.35 milligrams per day, you're talking about 140,000th of a teaspoon. And why does this matter? Well, because actually minerals and the loss of minerals in modern health create a lot of problems. Now, it's not only agricultural change, it's also demand in terms of genetically modified foods and a variety of other things, which has taken out the nutrient density from foods over time. And when that happens, it affects us in all sorts of different ways. These are just a variety of different things that I've picked out to show you. But one of the things which I wanted to put across is that I came across a concept or a saying very recently, and it's called consensual validation. So it means that I can say to this group of people here, we have a consensual understanding that nutrition is important to health and well-being. I don't have to go into great details to explain that. Equally, we all have a passion about a certain consideration. So the previous speakers were talking about the gut biome. And I get a sense that in many ways we are like the blind people trying to describe an elephant. Each person has a hold of the trunk or the tail or the leg, and we know it in detail, but we don't really understand what the elephant is all about. So during my 40 years of a chiropractor, nutritionist, naturopath, I hope I can bring a little bit more wholeness to the picture. And as a result of that, we need to look at how these concomitant non-communicable diseases have increased over time. And they're significant. So that now 75% of the deaths in the world relate to non-communicable disease conditions. And globally, 1 billion people are affected in some way or other with a mental disorder. Now, I'm going to talk as a geologist here because I think that again is something which people misunderstand and don't appreciate. It's taken us 4.5 billion years to get to this particular point in our evolution. And we actually represent the apex of that evolutionary phase. And we have to realize that during that evolution, we actually contain within the human genome 30% of a plant, 50% of fungi, 60% of insects, 70% of amphibian and fish. And then when we come into the mammals, it varies from 80% up to 98% in the chimpanzee. So we contain all of that within us. We are the product of evolution as a result of 450 years. And we don't give our immune system necessarily the significance it should have. So I want to bring into a concept of evolution, adaptation at life. How wonderful we are as human beings at adapting and compensating and adjusting to the environment that we find ourselves. And we have, as I said, a particular genome which contains all the elements associated with the life of the planet. But we also have a unique DNA. My teacher in America said to me, if you really want good health, what you have to do is select your great-great-great-grandparents very well indeed, because that's our unique stamp. That's uniquely us. He also taught me about the triune of life in a chiropractic context. So if we can look at all the different nutraceuticals here, and ultimately they're the innate matter. If I fall down dead at this particular moment in time, actually my physical body is going to be exactly the same physiology as I am standing here talking to you. But I have more than that. I have life. And that's part of the innate energy of the body. But overall, that is supervised and conducted by the innate intelligence. That's the thing that when I've drunk this drink of water, I didn't think, how's it going to be? Is it nails, hair, digestive? I don't have to worry about that. That's my conscious mind. What I do have to have is the faith in my body's ability to look after me. And if we put the right thing in, like its intelligence is better than any doctor, physician, therapist you're ever likely to come across. So in this regard, let's look at adaptation and life. This is a concept brought to me by a very good friend of mine, Stephen Davis, who opened up BioLab many years ago in London to take out hair analysis, sweat analysis, urine analysis, so on and so forth. And he created this concept whereby if we look at the baseline, that's the unique human being. If we look at the constitutional factors, every one of us here has certain genetic traits that perhaps are a bit deviant from the baseline. But during our lifetime, we have a load of biomechanical issues. We have a lot of biochemical imbalances. And that also includes not just the nutritive element, but also the ultra-processed foods, the colorings, the flavorings, the preservatives, and all the chemicals that exist now in the 21st century that were never there in the 18th century. And in addition to that, we have to deal with the psychological difficulties that come along during our life. Now, up to a certain point, we have the potential to adapt and compensate and adjust. But once that symptom threshold is exceeded, that's when the symptom presents itself. And we should actually listen to that symptom and understand that our body doesn't speak French, German, Latin, or whatever. It only can express itself symptomatically. And somehow or other we have to deal with that. This is a similar sort of consideration, but it deals with psychological issues that come towards us during the course of our lives. Each and every one of us. And we have to deal with the anxiety, the stress, and everything else that's associated with it, up to a certain point. So if we go back to electrolytes, because that's my particular leg of the elephant, and hydration, minerals play a huge role in that understanding. But minerals are actually quite difficult to assimilate and digest. And as I say, I go back a good number of years in terms of health food shows and trade shows and trying to understand the nuances associated with different products. But this is a relatively simple experiment which shows how minerals are accepted in a blank sort of context, but we don't really necessarily understand the implications of when we digest them or if we can digest them. So this is a distilled water, and I'm sure probably most of you already realize that distilled water is actually an insulator of electricity. So once I turn that light bulb on, although there's a significant amount of current going between the anode and the cathode, that light bulb doesn't light up. There's no conductive electrical mineral component associated with that distilled water. I brought some gravel from outside, minerals. If I put those in there, same difference. Now, initially, when actually supplements existed as only vitamin C, vitamin E, and vitamin D, you actually had a mineral supplement called dolomite, which was a calcium and magnesium carbonate, which was pretty much the same as this. It went in one end and came out the other. It was very, very difficult to actually assimilate and utilize. So let's look at a different type of water that these lovely people have given me. Now, on the back of this, there's a nutrient component. This is full of minerals per se. But are those minerals readily available in a digestive sense? Well, yes. Look, that light bulb has lit up. So part of the mineral component are able to be digested in an electrolyte criteria. Now, I'm representing a company which are based in America that actually take water from the Great Salt Lake, all the water in terms of normal seawater, in an electrolyte format. They put that into an evaporation dam, and over a 2-year period, it becomes a supersaturated solution. Sodium chloride crystallizes out, and you end up with a magnesium chloride soup with trace and ultra-trace elements that include significantly lithium and boron. Now, as I drop this into the distilled water, you can see the difference. That's just a few drops, just to illustrate how readily available and bioavailable these electrolytes are. Also, when we're dealing with a cell, we often think of the sodium-potassium pump or the magnesium and calcium considerations. But in actual fact, trace and ultra-trace elements are crucial to the functioning of that cell. And that movement of minerals from one outside to inside of the cell is where we get our energy. That is our life force. This particular diagram, incidentally, was taken from a more recent subdivision of geology called medical geology, which gives you an understanding, again, dependent on where you live in terms of the bedrock, the soils that you're likely to come across, and ultimately the nutrition that you're going to get. So again, we're dealing with a situation where, from my perspective, we are mineral deficient, and that is the base. If you think of the physiology of the body, we're made up principally of water and minerals as a pyramid, 60% water, minerals on top. We can also consider proteins and carbohydrates and fats. But if the base of that pyramid isn't correct in terms of the hydration and the mineral content, then the rest of the pyramid isn't going to work as well as it could or it should do. So it's a relatively simple message, is that if you can optimize your hydration as well as your electrolyte mineral balance, you're going to get far better results, both as an optimum health requirement, as well as those particular formulations that we all deal with in specific micronutrient considerations. Also, the wonderful thing about MRI, Mineral Resources International, is that this is their factory. And I think that coming back to a naturopathic sort of context of the evolution, the significance of minerals, and how they play an intrinsic and fundamental role in our general health and well-being is something that we all should take into consideration. Now, in their portfolio of products, there's a particular product which is a blend of different minerals. They contain sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And by placing that particular formulation into water, it has been shown scientifically to enable the body to actually absorb water 74% more effectively than water alone. So again, you're dealing here with a very, very simple but very effective way of optimizing general health and well-being, not only physical, but mental and emotional. Because the first sign of dehydration, and that reminds me, thank you very much.